Alright, time to clean up the body components for this Retina II type 014. So, cotton buds and lighter fluid is the order of the day, and I'm just cleaning all the surfaces to remove dust, oil, any contaminants. One thing, cleaning it gives you the opportunity to inspect it closely, and so you can see if there's any problems with corrosion, anything of that nature. This camera is relatively sound, so everything's looking pretty good. This track at the top is where the arm for the rangefinder folds away when you fold the front of the camera. So I'm just wiping around the top of the camera body here. As you can see, it all looks pretty clean. Here's where the tripod socket sits. There's not much to see there, and of course there's no real working action happening there. That's good. Well, I've wiped all those surfaces with the cotton bud, so we've got rid of any grease. I'm just going to use a paintbrush to flick out any loose dust. Blow that away. That body's fine. Next task, to deal with the folding struts. So the first thing I normally do is clip those into the open position and look at them closely. And what I'm looking for is to see if anything is bent. It looks to me like this piece here on the end is bent slightly, and that'll need to be adjusted. I'll find a pair of pliers to do that. And all that means most likely is either the camera was dropped, or just as likely someone tried to force the front shut without pressing the buttons, and they've just bent that slightly. I'm checking it for any looseness. That's pretty good. Sometimes if it's been abused in any fashion, what will happen is that this track here will be stretched open so that this will rattle. I'm not feeling any movement there, that's good. So yes, definitely at that end that's a little bit off square, so I'll just square that up, and its mate on the other side, it was not quite so bad. I'm looking at the shape of the arms. Now the inner arms should be straight. There shouldn't be any bend there. That one's certainly got a tweak on the end. I'll have another go at that. That's better. The inner arm should be straight. The outer arms should be slightly bent. They should be bent outwards so that it's further in the centre, further out at the ends. That one looks okay. That one's okay too. You should be able to tell this bracket, when it's sitting loose like this outside the body, everything's clipped in place, it should be obviously stretched out at this end. And that when it's trapped in the body, that means that these parts are under tension, which tends to help pop these buttons into position. That looks adequate to me, that looks good. These levers on the side here, this is for the shutter release. This piece here is worked by the shutter release in the body, and it acts on this piece, which acts on this piece, which pulls the arm on the shutter. These two levers effectively stop you being able to depress the buttons if the focus ring is not set to infinity. There's nothing else odd about that, it just needs to be clean, and so I'm just going to wipe this over to remove grease and dirt, and before it goes back in the body that'll have to be given some fresh lubricant. In these tracks at the back here. You don't need to lubricate the hinge joints there. There's nothing particularly going on there, and there'll be quite likely some origin of the lubricant still there. That's not really an area of concern. So all I want to do is make sure everything is clean. One of the reasons to remove all the old grease and dirt is because the grease attracts and holds dust, abrasive particles, bits of sand and other nuisances of that nature, which if left in place would mean that things would wear out quicker than they otherwise would. So by getting rid of the old grease, we can get rid of any accumulated grit and abrasives, and then we can lubricate it again with fresh grease, which of course will have none of those problems because it'll be nice and fresh. Let's swing those arms out of the way. Close that slightly so I can get to those bits of the track that were covered. I'm checking the action of the shutter release to make sure that that's smooth, there's no sign of corrosion, and that looks pretty good to me. So regarding lubrication of these parts, let's just open that up. I'd use some molybdenum paste. This piece runs on the post in the camera body, so I'll just run a little bit there. I run a little bit on the shaft here that those components will slide on, and that's all that's needed. Depending on how this arm is bent, sometimes you end up with a high friction area on that edge, but that doesn't look like that's the case. I have some other grease here. This is a synthetic which I use in here. And the front slots, I will lubricate those once that's in place, because they're likely to get dislodged by the handling anyway. So, what have we got? We should have, let's find my components. We should have a spring that goes here. And And we have 4 screws that hold the bellows struts into the body, and that is those screws. And there are 2 spacer washers that fit in there too, and I've got to find those. If I'd prepared this properly, they'd just come to hand, but that's not the way I do things. I'm messy. So what have I done with my washers? There's one of them. Well, if there's one of them, there's 2 of them. So let's find the other one. Yes, there we go. Alright. Let's give that shaft a bit of a wipe with molybdenum. It's called molybdenum paste. I don't know what the binder is, the fluid that holds it all together, but it's fairly dry, and that's all that's required. So here are our bellows struts. Now, this strap goes this way up, fits over that post like that. I have the struts open in the extended position, and I can drop that down into the body. I'm checking that everything looks okay. Now there are screws top and bottom, and there are spacer washers top and bottom. Just make sure that's clicked into place. So I will start by putting my screws in at the end of the body here. Now we've got 3 black screws here. Now one of them came from the base of the camera and it's got glue on it still. That's that one. The other 2 did not have glue, of course, because they came from inside the back of the camera, and so they are nice and clean. To run the first one in, I don't bother doing it up tight, I want that loose. Make sure I've got the other one. Run that one in. Again, I don't do that up tight. Next we have to get our washers down in place, they're spacers. Now, we've got a screw goes in here, the spacer goes between this piece of the frame and the camera body. So we have to slide that down into place. So normally I drop it into place sitting on that frame, lift the frame out slightly with the tip of my tweezers, and I can just see the crescent shape of that washer there in place, and I can drop the screw in, run that screw in. It's not picking up. That's better. So again, I don't do that up tight, I just pull it up snug, and we have the washer to go in at the top. Again, it's the same deal. At the top, the complication is this piece here, this slide that guides the rangefinder arm. that sits pretty much in the position we're going to get that washer down into, so it's harder to get it down into place. So let's see if I can drop that into place. No, it's just turned around 90 degrees and blocking me. Tip it back out, start again. I'll start with it at the end, lift the struts out, encourage that washer to drop down into place. It's just dropped in, it's not quite where I want it. I've managed to push it along a bit. I can just see the very edge of it here, so with a bit of luck I can pull that into position with a pair of pointed tweezers, and I'm checking that, looking down from the top, that it is actually there and that I haven't just pushed it away into no man's land, and that looks good. And this screw goes in. This is a nickel plated screw. It's quite a pronounced post. A spring hooks against that. Alright, so that goes through the washer and into that bracket, and that is, I'm looking closely, yes, the washer is all in place. So we've got our 4 screws can be done up tight. That one, the one at the base, and the 2 on the inside in the film cassette chamber. And the struts are all back in. And that clips nicely into position. And that clips in quite well, and I'm looking to make sure that it's square. If it was not square with the body at this point, I would have expected to see that the struts were quite noticeably bent. That looks quite good. So that part's quite good. To turn my attention to the focus mount and its related components. I'm just checking I haven't picked up any screws with that, because these are very dirty, and this will be hard, dried out grease. So using a toothpick, I'll run around this and scrape off the worst of that grease. Now this is quite dry, it's almost like wax in consistency. It can dry out even further than this, and it becomes almost looks like chalk, to tell the truth, except it sticks together much better if it's very, very dry. And this will glue things together effectively. In some cases it'll stop you being able to move things at all. In other cases it dries out, it stays there, but it becomes a high friction area. It certainly doesn't lubricate things nicely. So I'm just clearing out the worst of that nasty grease. Now this should largely be cleaned out using this cigarette lighter fluid. Ronsonol being my preferred brand, but use what you can get. as I wipe that, I can see it doesn't wipe completely away. That's quite thick, that stuff, and reluctant to shift. And here, the cotton buds I'm using to do this job were cotton buds that I've previously used when I was working on the shutter. And these ones have had fairly minimal use. They've been used to do shutter components, or they've been used to do the lens. They're fine for this. They're too dirty for shutters and lenses. So even though I use a lot of cotton buds, there's a little bit of recycling and reuse goes on. And I'll know when I've done a proper job here because the cotton buds will come off quite clean. We're certainly moving in the right direction there. Alright, so I'm inspecting that. There's some discoloration there, now I'm not sure what that is. You wouldn't expect to get any corrosion on these surfaces because usually they've been quite well smeared with grease, of course. So I'm just looking at that to see what that mark was. It seems to be okay. It was a bit chalky looking. Not sure what that was. Right, that part looks fine. Look, I'll just turn over that paper because that's nasty. These two components. Now there's a couple of ways I typically deal with these. One way is I just leave all the parts in a degreaser to soften up that old grease, and that certainly works well. Often with cameras of this nature I will do it manually like this, so I'm just using solvent to remove that grease. Of course it doesn't all come off with the first application. It will come off. Now I'm just getting a bit buried in cotton buds here. So I'm going around the inside. This is just removing old grease. Of course the grease is dry and hardened, but reluctant to move. And I want to get it all off the outside as well. And I'll take a toothpick and I'll run around any of these surfaces that I can get to. Oh yeah, you can see it's peeling off. That's quite hard and like wax. Need to get all that off. I've got a product I use, that one, CRC Heavy Duty Lectra Clean. That'll dissolve this stuff. It's carbon tetrafluorine or something. It makes you grow another head. I try not to splash it around more than I need to. If you haven't had children yet, you probably want to avoid it altogether. So I'm just making sure I get all of that out of the grooves and crevices. That's better. I'll give that one more wipe out, but I haven't finished even at that stage. There's still more work to do, because once I have cleaned the inner helical and we fit these together, we will use some more solvent and you work the helical with some solvent in it to loosen up the remaining grease so it can be cleaned away. Yeah, the other way I do this is I soak the parts in a product that's made for painters. It's called grease and wax remover, and after it had been soaked for a few hours in that, typically I would put the whole lot into my ultrasonic cleaner with hot water and an ammonia based detergent and let it run for 15 minutes or so, in which case all the rubbish should have been stripped away. It should all be clean. And that's does a pretty positive job, but doing it manually like this will certainly do the job. Right, so we've cleaned our inner and outer. I need to start them, and I just the feel of that, I can just tell that there's still some grease and rubbish there. Fuck. Start with a new one of those. That's nasty. Alright, well I'll get a bit of fluff on there. I just want to align these. Well, we helpfully made some alignment marks, and I can see they align there, but this is too far out, so I need to rotate it part of a turn and re-engage it. Now I'm about one step the wrong way there, so I'll rotate it out, click it into place, and we should be about right. Okay, so that place, my alignment marks are there, the surfaces are flush, I know that's the right position. I'm going to put a bit of solvent on here and then work this. Well, as a wee faux pas there, the camera had stopped recording and I was at the stage where I was just going to tell you how I had these components nicely aligned, and I was going to clean up the threads a bit more and show you how I did it. This is not the component from that camera. I've got beyond that stage, so this is a ring in from something completely different, in fact a Retina IIa. Or at least that's the box of parts I got it out of. So I've just cleaned this up to the same stage. I can feel some stickiness in those threads still, and how I deal with that. So run a bit of solvent in there and work that backwards and forwards. Take a cotton bud with some solvent on it, wipe that round the exposed threads, and this will remove the loose stuff I've just shaken loose. The same at the other side. I'll do the inside of the outer helical there. And I'll do the same at the other face of that. Now when you're doing this, the only important thing to watch is that you're wiping in the direction that is lifting the stuff out of the threads. Otherwise you will end up wiping threads of your cotton bud into the mating surfaces, and it'll be stiff, won't want to run smoothly at all. So basically that's all I did, and that was to clean out the residue by working those surfaces together. The camera just stopped on me there. I presume I just hit a file size limit. I'm just saying that the retainer plate here that holds the unit together now needs to be cleaned. Again, I'm doing the best to remove the old grease and with it any dust or grit that it might have accumulated. That looks fine. Now, These components will be assembled together. I haven't lubricated them yet. I'm just test fitting them. Alright, so my two so this should in theory drop in here without too much trouble. It doesn't want to. That's better. It does. Okay, so I'm checking the feel of this by rotating the outer helical, which of course is what your focus scale ring is attached to. I'm checking the action, seeing if the inner helical moves forward and backwards smoothly, and there's no binding or no undue stiffness. Given that there's no lubricant here at all, it feels very good indeed. This of course, when we lubricate it, that'll be held together with 6 screws around the perimeter which hold the outer helical firmly in place. That feels good. Right, those components are good. They can be lubricated, they can be fitted back to the camera. What other components will I need here? Well, I'll be needing some screws. There are 4 screws that hold the focus mount to the front standard in the camera body. That's those 4. And we'll start with those. I'll extend the struts, flip these tabs out to the side, there's 1 screw in each corner. That screw's doing its best to get away. Let's have it back. Get some better tweezers. That's better. Right, so I'll nip those screws up. That's done. Now I'll collapse that front. There are 4 screws that hold the bellows to the back of the front standard, and they can go in now. As usual, I run all the screws down, make sure they're all home. Then I'll go around and tighten them. Pull that front standard back out into position. That's quite firm now because it's got the tension of the bellows holding that. Lubrication of the focus helical. This is the grease I use. It's made for doing helicals. Something called Helimax XP. Whoopsie, I've just managed to disassemble that, so I've got to start it in the right position again. And it wasn't there. Right, this way a bit. There, two positions I'd say. Multi-start threads are always entertaining to get started. You do get better at it with practice. I'm one position out there. Now I've gone one the wrong way. Here we go. That's correct. So I'll rotate it enough to expose the thread. Normally I wipe a little bit of this on in about 5 spots. Around the outside and work that in. That feels good, and I usually come in, extend the ring out to the front and put a little bit on there too. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It requires very little. You don't need to absolutely fill the helical up with grease. In fact, it would be counterproductive to do so. It would be quite stiff, it would drag. It feels good. It's got a little bit of resistance, but not too much. If it's very loose, it becomes a problem because when you adjust the focus, it's easily knocked. So you lose your focus before you've had a chance to do anything at all. So I'm just doing these inside surfaces, and where it aligns on these posts, I'll just put a tiny drip bit in there. Now this is marked of course, so I know which way up it goes. It drops into position. Now the retainer, you can usually see that there's usually bright spots on it where it's been rubbing on that outer helical, where it, in this case the camera hasn't had much work, so it doesn't really show it. But you just need to put a tiny smear on that edge just so that it's not unduly stiff. And that drops on. It only fits on in one place. And there are 6 small screws that hold that together. And I can start fitting them in place. Just looking to see what I'd done with the screwdriver, but unusually I had put it away neatly, which is not my normal way at all. Normally I just drop stuff on the bench and search for it later. Alright, I'll do 2 screws up. I'll check the action of that helical. Oh, it's good. It's nice and smooth. That's it for the day, I think. End of the day for me.